Success had always been my armor, my shield against the whispers of doubt that occasionally crept into the corners of my mind. At 53, I'd built everything I'd ever dreamed of: Stallworth Construction, a company that bore my family name and dominated the Seattle skyline with its ambitious projects. My wife Caroline, still turning heads at 48, had been by my side for 25 years. Our daughter Jennifer was finishing her master's in architecture, ready to join the family business. From the outside, the Stallworth name sparkled like the glass facades of our buildings. But success, I was learning, could be the perfect blind spot. The first crack appeared during our annual charity gala at the Four Seasons. I stood at the podium, delivering my usual speech about community investment and sustainable development, when I noticed something off in Caroline's expression. She sat at our usual table, phone in hand, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, not the polite, society smile she typically wore at these events, but something more private, more genuine. Marcus Chen, our new project director, caught my eye from across the room. He quickly looked away, busying himself with his phone. I dismissed it then. Caroline had always been the social butterfly, the heart of our corporate family. Her easy rapport with employees was one of the reasons we'd maintained such a strong company culture. But that night, something about the way she avoided my gaze during the drive home needled at me, like a splinter too deep to reach. Marcus has really revolutionized the East Side project, she mentioned casually as we pulled into our driveway. His ideas about integrated community spaces are exactly what we needed. I mumbled agreement, remembering how she'd championed his hiring 6 months ago. At the time, I'd been grateful for her insight. Now, the memory carried a different weight. The next few weeks brought more subtle shifts. Board meetings ran longer, with Caroline and Marcus often staying behind to discuss community engagement strategies. My secretary, Linda, who'd been with me since the company's early days, started giving me odd looks when I asked about Caroline's schedule. Then came the anonymous email. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as I was reviewing the quarterly projections. No subject line, no signature, just a series of photographs, Caroline and Marcus entering the Olympic Hotel. Caroline's hand on his arm, her head thrown back in laughter. Marcus leading her through the lobby, his hand resting in the small of her back with familiar intimacy. The timestamps showed different dates, different times. This wasn't a one-time thing. I sat in my office, staring at the Seattle skyline I'd helped shape, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built my career on solid foundations, on understanding the importance of proper groundwork. Yet here I was, watching my personal foundation crack beneath my feet. Linda knocked softly, entering with her usual stack of contracts requiring my signature. Her eyes lingered on my face longer than necessary. "Is everything all right, Mr. Stallworth?" I almost told her. Linda had been more than just a secretary. She'd been a confidant through the company's growing pains, through Jennifer's rebellious teenage years, through my father's difficult passing. But something held me back. Pride, maybe. Or perhaps the nagging suspicion that she already knew more than she was letting on. Just reviewing some concerning documents, I managed, closing my laptop. She hesitated, then placed a small post-it note on my desk before leaving. On it was written a name and number, David Morrison, private investigator. The note felt like a weight in my hand, heavier than paper had any right to be. I'd built my life on trust, on handshakes and looking people in the eye. The thought of hiring someone to spy on my wife, to document her betrayal in cold, clinical detail, made my stomach turn. But as I sat there, watching the sun set behind the Olympic mountains, I thought about the empire I'd built. About Jennifer, about the legacy I'd promised my father on his deathbed. About the hundreds of employees who depended on Stallworth Construction for their livelihoods. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the keypad. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see Marcus in the conference room, gesturing animatedly over some blueprints. Caroline stood beside him, their shoulders nearly touching as they bent over the plans. The number was already half-dialed before I realized I'd made my decision. Sometimes, I reflected bitterly, the only way to protect what you've built is to be willing to tear it all down and start again. Mr. Morrison, I said when the line connected. I need your help with a delicate matter. The sun had fully set now, casting long shadows across my office. In the darkness, I could barely make out my reflection in the window, a man I hardly recognized anymore, poised on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Yes, I continued, watching Caroline and Marcus leave the conference room together. I can meet tonight. David Morrison's office existed in that peculiar twilight between respectability and shadows, much like the man himself. He occupied a small suite in an aging downtown building, the kind that had seen Seattle transform from a logging town to a tech hub while somehow remaining unchanged. The leather chairs were worn but clean, the desk substantial but scarred. Everything about the space spoke of discretion earned through decades of keeping other people's secrets. The thing about infidelity, Morrison said, studying the photos I'd forwarded him, is that it's rarely just about the affair. His voice carried the gravelly weight of too many cigarettes and too many similar conversations. In my experience, Mr. Stallworth, when there's this much at stake, there's usually something deeper running beneath the surface. I leaned forward, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles had gone white. What exactly are you suggesting? He laid out 3 more photographs I hadn't seen before. Caroline entering the First Maritime Bank downtown. Marcus at the same bank 2 hours later. Both of them meeting with someone I recognized with a jolt, James Henderson, our company's chief financial officer. Your wife, Morrison said carefully, has been very busy lately. Not just with Mr. Chen. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about betrayal of the heart, this was about the company. My company. My father's legacy. How long have you been watching them? I was hired 3 months ago. He held up a hand as I started to protest. Not by you. By Linda. The second shock of the evening landed even harder than the first. Linda, my trusted secretary of 15 years, had seen this coming before I had. Had tried to protect me in her own way. She noticed discrepancies, Morrison continued. Nothing concrete enough to take to you directly. But enough to worry her. The East Side project's numbers didn't add up. Cost overruns that couldn't be explained. Meetings that weren't logged. When she saw Mrs. Stallworth and Mr. Chen growing closer, she connected the dots. I stood abruptly, pacing to his window. Seattle's lights sprawled below us, a constellation of other lives, other stories, other betrayals playing out across the city. Somewhere out there, Caroline was probably with him right now. Planning. Scheming. Dismantling everything I'd built, piece by piece. They're embezzling. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. Using the East Side project as cover. Morrison nodded slowly. The evidence suggests they've been siphoning funds for months. Mr. Chen's community engagement initiatives provide perfect cover, lots of cash flowing to various local organizations, hard to track, easy to skim. Your wife's social connections help smooth any questions. And Henderson cooks the books to make it all look legitimate. The rage that filled me wasn't hot. It was cold, crystalline, clarifying. I thought of Caroline's recent enthusiasm for charity work, her insistence on handling the company's community outreach personally. I thought of Marcus's innovative ideas for project management, always requiring just a bit more budget flexibility. I thought of Henderson's quiet competence, his ability to make the numbers dance to whatever tune we needed. I had given them everything they needed to rob me blind. There's more, Morrison said, his tone shifting slightly. Your daughter Jennifer. My head snapped up. Leave her out of this. I wish I could. He slid another photo across the desk. Jennifer, my brilliant, beautiful daughter, meeting with Marcus at a coffee shop far from campus. The timestamp showed it was taken just yesterday. She's been meeting with him regularly for weeks. Always in out-of-the-way places, always very intense conversations. The cold rage cracked, letting something molten and dangerous seep through. Using my wife to betray me was one thing. Corrupting my daughter was another entirely. What do you recommend? My voice sounded strange in my ears, distant and controlled despite the chaos churning inside me. Morrison leaned back, studying me with eyes that had seen too many similar stories end in tragedy. Legally, we have enough to go to the authorities. But once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. Your company's reputation, your family's name, everything gets dragged into the light. I thought of my father, of the calloused hands that had laid the first bricks of what would become Stallworth Construction. Of his voice, rough with emotion, making me promise to take care of the family legacy. Of Jennifer's graduation next month, where she was supposed to officially join the company as my heir apparent. No, I said finally. No authorities. Not yet. Morrison nodded, unsurprised. Then we play their game. Gather more evidence. Set up our own pieces on the board. But remember, the longer we wait, the more they can steal. It's not about the money anymore. I turned back to the window, watching my reflection overlay the city lights. I barely recognized the hard-eyed stranger staring back at me. It's about justice. And family. Just be careful, Morrison warned quietly. Justice and revenge look an awful lot alike in the dark. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Caroline, working late again with Marcus. Don't wait up. I texted back a simple, okay, feeling the weight of the lies between us. But for the first time since this all began, I felt something else too, a sense of purpose, cold and sharp as a blade. Let them think they had me fooled. Let them believe their scheme was working perfectly. I would play the oblivious husband, the trusting boss, while I quietly gathered my own evidence, set my own traps, prepared my own surprises. After all, I hadn't built an empire by being anyone's fool. The next morning, I had Linda schedule a company-wide meeting for the end of the week. Time to discuss the future of Stallworth Construction, I told her with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. All senior staff required to attend. She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. The game was about to begin. There's a particular kind of silence that descends over a boardroom when truth hangs suspended between revelation and denial. I stood at the head of our conference table, watching the faces of those who had betrayed me, measuring the minute tells that betrayed their carefully constructed facades. Caroline's manicured fingers, too still on the polished mahogany. Marcus's left eyebrow, twitching almost imperceptibly. Henderson's steady breathing, too measured to be natural. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. Somewhere in the distance, a construction crane from our East Side project swung lazily against the Seattle skyline, a metal pendulum marking time until everything would change. The future of Stallworth Construction, I began, my voice carrying the weight of authority I'd spent decades cultivating, requires absolute transparency. The word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension across the room. Which is why I'm announcing a comprehensive audit of all our projects, starting with East Side. The reactions were subtle but telling. Henderson's pen stopped its perpetual motion. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward his phone. Caroline's smile remained perfect, practiced, poisonous. "Darling," she interjected, her voice honey-smooth, "is this really necessary? The quarterly reports show everything's proceeding exactly as planned." I met her eyes across the table, remembering how I used to drown in their blue depths. Now I saw them for what they were, mirrors reflecting back only what she wanted others to see. "Exactly as planned," I echoed, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "That's what concerns me." Linda entered silently, distributing folders to each senior staff member. I watched Caroline's face as she opened hers, saw the momentary flicker of fear when she recognized the hotel photographs. Marcus's folder contained documentation of the suspicious fund transfers. Henderson's held printouts of irregular accounting entries. These are individual issues I'd like each of you to address, I continued, maintaining my corporate demeanor while savoring the growing panic in their eyes. We'll discuss them in private meetings throughout the week. The room erupted in controlled chaos, protests about timing, questions about methodology, concerns about resource allocation. I let them talk, watching the alliances reveal themselves in shared glances and subtle nods. Even now, they thought they could maneuver their way out of this, not realizing they were already caught in a web of my design. As the meeting dispersed, Jennifer appeared in the doorway. My heart clenched at the sight of her, my daughter, my legacy, my unknown variable in this equation of betrayal. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before, "we need to talk." I nodded, gesturing her inside while the others filed out. Caroline lingered last, her hand brushing my arm with familiar intimacy. "Don't work too late, darling," she said, her words carrying their usual double meaning. "We have the charity board dinner tonight." The door closed behind her, leaving Jennifer and me alone in the suddenly vast boardroom. My daughter stood by the windows, her silhouette sharp against the morning light, so like her mother in stance but carrying something of my father's steel in her spine. "How long have you known?" she asked without preamble. "About which part?" I countered, studying her profile. "The affair? The embezzlement? Or your coffee meetings with Marcus?" She turned, and I saw something unexpected in her expression, not guilt, but fierce determination. "You don't understand what's really happening here, Dad. None of us wanted it to go this far, but—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Before you finish that sentence, remember who taught you about loyalty. About family. That's exactly what this is about." Her voice cracked with emotion. "Family. Legacy. Everything you built, everything Grandpa built, it's all at risk, and you can't even see it." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" She reached into her bag, pulling out a familiar leather-bound notebook, my father's project diary from the early days of Stallworth Construction. "Have you ever really read this? All of it? Including the entries from the Madison Street project?" The name sent a chill down my spine. The Madison Street development had been our first major project, the one that put Stallworth Construction on the map. My father had leveraged everything we owned to finance it. The success had launched our empire. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "whatever you think you found." "The truth," she cut me off. "About how Grandpa really got the financing. About the partnerships he made. About the promises that came due." She laid the notebook on the table between us. "Mom and Marcus aren't stealing from the company, Dad. They're trying to save it." The morning sun caught the edge of the notebook, highlighting the worn leather that contained either salvation or damnation. As I reached for it, my phone buzzed with a text from Morrison, new information. "Urgent. Meet tonight." I looked at my daughter, this woman who had somehow grown up to hold pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed. "Tell me everything," I said, sinking into my chair. "From the beginning." But as Jennifer opened the notebook, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and that the truth might prove more devastating than any lie. The truth has weight. I felt it in my hands as I traced the weathered pages of my father's notebook, each entry another stone added to the burden of legacy I'd carried so proudly. The Madison Street project, our genesis, our foundation, our original sin, sprawled across the pages in my father's precise handwriting, each word another crack in the edifice of everything I'd believed. The Cavalletti family, Jennifer's voice seemed to come from a great distance, didn't just finance the project. They owned it. All of it. Including us. The name struck like a hammer blow to the chest. The Cavallettis were Seattle's worst-kept secret, old money that had never quite scrubbed the dirt from its roots. My father had always warned me to stay clear of them, to build our empire the right way. Another lie in a lifetime of carefully constructed deceptions. Keep reading, Jennifer urged softly. I didn't want to. God help me, I wanted to close the notebook, lock it away with all the other family secrets that were better left buried. But the truth has gravity as well as weight. Once you start falling into it, there's no climbing back out. The entries detailed a deal with the devil, financing that came with strings made of steel, annual payments disguised as construction contracts, a generational debt that had been silently bleeding us dry for decades. My father's elegant script grew increasingly desperate as he documented his attempts to break free, to protect his family from the consequences of his choices. The East Side Project, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place with sickening clarity. It's not embezzlement. It's payment. Jennifer nodded, her face a mirror of my own anguish. Mom and Marcus found out 6 months ago. The Cavalettis were calling in their marker, either we pay back everything, with interest, or they take controlling interest in Stallworth Construction. Why didn't they come to me? The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I already knew the answer. Because you're like Grandpa, she said, gentle but unflinching. You believe in doing everything the right way, the clean way. But sometimes, Dad, there is no clean way out. Morrison's text messages suddenly took on new meaning. What urgent information did he have? Whose side was he really on? The questions multiplied like fractures in safety glass, spreading until the whole picture threatened to shatter. My phone buzzed again, Caroline, checking if I was still coming to the charity board dinner. Every message from her now carried double meanings, triple meanings, layers of truth and deception so intertwined I couldn't separate them anymore. The dinner tonight, I said slowly, a horrible suspicion dawning. Who else will be there? Jennifer's silence was answer enough. Michael Cavaletti, she finally confirmed. He's joining the board. It's their way of tightening the noose. I closed my father's notebook, feeling the weight of 3 generations of Stallworth men pressing down on my shoulders. My father had built this company on a foundation of secrets and compromise. I had nurtured it with blind faith and willful ignorance. And now Jennifer, my brilliant, fierce daughter, was trying to save it the only way she could. Tell me about Marcus, I said. The whole truth. He used to work for them, she admitted. But he switched sides when he saw what they were planning. He's been helping us move money around, staying one step ahead of their auditors. Mom's social connections have been crucial, no one questions when she moves large donations through her charity networks. The irony was savage enough to draw blood. I had spent weeks plotting revenge against the very people who were fighting to protect everything I held dear. My wife, who I'd imagined in the arms of another man, had instead been orchestrating an intricate financial dance to keep our company alive. My daughter, who I'd feared was being corrupted, had been shouldering a burden that should never have been hers to bear. But before I could respond, Linda burst into the room, her usual composure shattered. Mr. Stallworth, David Morrison has been found dead in his office. The police are calling it a suicide, but... The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Jennifer's face went pale. Dad, if the Cavalettis knew we were investigating. I stood, my decision crystallizing with the clarity that comes in moments of crisis. The charity dinner starts in 3 hours. Call your mother, tell her I know everything. Tell Marcus to get every piece of documentation he has about the Madison Street project. And Jennifer. I paused, looking at my daughter with new eyes, seeing not just my child but a warrior who had been fighting battles I never knew existed. Get me everything you have on Michael Cavaletti. Every secret, every weakness, every skeleton he thinks is safely buried. What are you going to do? She asked, though I could see in her eyes that she already knew. What your grandfather couldn't. What your mother and Marcus haven't been able to. Tonight, we end this, one way or another. As Jennifer hurried out, I remained in the boardroom, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, Michael Cavalletti was preparing for a simple charity dinner, unaware that he was about to face 3 generations of stalwart vengeance. Morrison's death was meant to be a warning. Instead, they had just removed the last reason I had to play by the rules. I picked up my phone to make one final call. Some secrets, I had learned, were worth keeping. Others needed to be detonated in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, to bring down an entire empire. It was time to show the Cavallettis what happened, and you backed a stalwart into a corner. There's a peculiar clarity that comes in the hour before you're ready to lose everything. I stood in my office as the sunset painted Seattle in shades of blood and gold, watching my reflection fragment across the glass wall that had witnessed so many of my triumphs. The man staring back at me was both stranger and intimate, a fusion of who I had been and who I was becoming, forged in the crucible of brutal truth. Morrison's death weighed on me like a stone sewn into my soul. His body had been found slumped over his desk, a glass of scotch spilled across scattered photographs, our evidence, our desperate attempt to understand a truth that had been 3 generations in the making. The police called it suicide, but I knew better. I recognized an execution when I saw one. The Cavallettis were sending a message, written in the blood of the man I had drawn into our family's web of secrets. "The files you requested," Linda said softly, entering with a stack of documents that represented 30 years of careful documentation. My father's secret insurance policy, hidden away by the one person he had trusted with the full scope of his shame. "I've been keeping these since your father's last days. He made me promise to protect them, and to protect you." I smiled bitterly at the irony. All these years, I had thought I was the protector, of my family, of our legacy, of the stalwart name. Instead, I had been protected, swaddled in a cocoon of necessary lies woven by those who loved me most. My father's desperate dealings. Caroline's silent sacrifices. Jennifer's burden of knowledge. Even Linda's patient vigilance. They had all seen what I couldn't, that sometimes the greatest act of love is the willingness to be seen as the villain. The charity dinner invitation sat on my desk like a loaded gun, heavy with potential violence, waiting to be wielded. Michael Cavalletti would be expecting a simple evening of social niceties and subtle power plays. He wouldn't be expecting me to come armed with 3 decades of documented extortion, carefully preserved evidence of money laundering, and proof of connections to 2 suspicious deaths that had been ruled accidents. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline, "Everything is ready. Marcus has the digital copies secured. Jennifer's contact at the SEC is standing by. Are you certain about this?" I stared at her message, feeling the weight of years of misunderstanding dissolve into a new appreciation for her strength. She had played her role perfectly, the seemingly unfaithful wife, the social butterfly with questionable priorities. All while orchestrating a financial resistance that had kept the Cavallettis at bay far longer than they had expected. "Dad?" Jennifer appeared in the doorway, changed from her business attire into an evening gown that made her look achingly like her mother at that age. "The car's waiting. But there's something else you need to know before we do this." I gestured for her to continue, watching her wrestle with whatever new weight she had been carrying. "Morrison." She hesitated, then pressed on. "He wasn't just investigating us. He was building a case against the Cavallettis for the FBI. That's why they moved against him now. And..." Her voice caught. "He was my source. My way in. We were working together from the beginning." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Morrison's last text about urgent information hadn't been about uncovering more betrayal, it had been about providing us with the final pieces we needed for salvation. And now he was dead, another casualty in a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. I crossed to my private safe, removing the one piece of evidence I had discovered on my own, a single photograph from 1985, showing my father shaking hands with Anthony Cavalletti, Michael's father. Both men were smiling, but my father's eyes held a haunted look I had never understood until now. "Your grandfather wasn't weak," I told Jennifer, hearing the gravel in my voice. He was trapped. He made a deal with the devil to build something for his family, and he spent the rest of his life trying to break free of it. Now we finish what he started. I tucked the photograph into my jacket pocket, a reminder of where we had come from, and what we were fighting to escape. The Seattle skyline had darkened to twilight, our buildings now lit from within like beacons against the gathering night. "Linda," I said, "initiate Protocol Omega. If anything happens to any of us tonight, everything we have goes public, every document, every transaction, every buried secret. The Cavalettis won't just lose their hold on Stallworth Construction. They'll lose everything." She nodded, her fingers already flying across her keyboard. Decades of loyal service culminating in one final act of protection. I turned to my daughter, seeing in her face the same steel that had driven my father, that had sustained Caroline, that now coursed through my own veins with renewed purpose. "Ready?" "Ready," she confirmed, her voice steady. "Mom and Marcus are already in position. The SEC team is standing by. And Dad?" She touched my arm gently. "Whatever happens tonight, we face it together. As a family." As we walked toward the elevator, I felt the last pieces of my old self falling away. The naive builder of towers, the trusting husband, the blind father, all giving way to something harder, something forged in the fires of unwelcome truth. The Cavalettis had spent 3 generations binding us in chains of debt and obligation. They never expected those chains to become weapons in our hands. The doors closed on the empire I had built, and opened onto the battlefield where we would fight to keep it. One way or another, by midnight, the Stallworth name would mean something entirely new. Whether that meaning would be written in triumph or tragedy remained to be seen. Time becomes liquid in moments of destiny. Standing in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons, watching Michael Cavaletti work the crowd with practiced charm, I felt each second flow like mercury, heavy, poisonous, irreversible. The crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across faces that had haunted 3 generations of my family, creating masks of respectability over souls corroded by power. Caroline stood across the room, resplendent in midnight blue, her smile a weapon honed by years of silent warfare. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I saw all the battles she had fought alone, thinking she was protecting me from the truth. The depth of her love had manifested not in fidelity to my illusions, but in her willingness to appear faithless to preserve what mattered most. "Mr. Stallworth." Michael Cavaletti's voice carried the smooth assurance of a man who had never lost a war. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd join us tonight." His handshake was firm, practiced, the grip of a man who thought he held everything, including my future, in his manicured hands. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, feeling my father's photograph burn against my chest where it sat in my inner pocket. "We have so much to discuss." "Business can wait," he said with practiced joviality. "Tonight is about charity, about giving back to the community that has given us so much." The irony in his words was thick enough to choke on. I watched him circulate, remembering Morrison's body slumped over his desk. Another debt added to a ledger that stretched back decades, written in blood and broken promises. But Cavaletti had made a crucial mistake. He had assumed that my father's shame was my inheritance, that I would carry the same fears, the same desperate need to protect our reputation at any cost. He didn't understand that shame dies in the light of truth. The dinner proceeded with the choreographed precision of all such events. Speeches were made, awards presented, checks ceremoniously handed over to various causes. I sat at the head table, watching Jennifer work the room with Marcus, their tablets ready with the digital payload that would reshape everything. Linda's message arrived exactly on schedule, Protocol Omega armed and ready. When I finally rose to make my speech, I felt the weight of 3 generations rise with me. The room quieted, crystal glasses tinkling into silence, all eyes turning to the man they thought they knew, the successful builder, the naive husband, the fooled father. The man who had lived in the shadow of a debt he hadn't even known existed. Tonight, I began, we're here to talk about legacy. My voice carried across the hushed room, steady despite the thunder of my heart. About the debts we owe to the past, and the price we pay for the future. I saw the first flicker of unease cross Cavalletti's face as I pulled out my father's photograph. 30 years ago, two men shook hands and made a deal. One was desperate to build something lasting for his family. The other. I let the pause stretch, heavy with implication. The other saw an opportunity to forge chains that would bind generations. The room's atmosphere shifted, the social veneer cracking to reveal the predatory reality beneath. Cavalletti's hand twitched toward his phone, but Jennifer's quiet voice carried from behind him, I wouldn't. Every system you own is already compromised. One wrong move and 30 years of carefully hidden transactions go public. I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, the understanding that he faced not a desperate debtor, but a force of nature 3 generations in the making. Your father, he said carefully, understood the necessity of discretion. My father understood survival, I corrected him. But he taught me something far more important, that some legacies need to be burned to the ground so something honest can grow from the ashes. The next few minutes unfolded like a symphony of destruction. Caroline's network of society contacts became a web of witnesses. Marcus's financial expertise transformed into a scalpel, dissecting decades of criminal enterprise. Jennifer's legal acumen wielded our evidence like a sword, while Linda's protocols ensured that every backup plan, every escape route, every possibility of denial was systematically destroyed. In the end, Michael Cavalletti, the man who had held my family's future hostage for so long, was revealed as what he truly was, a parasite who had confused his host's patience for weakness. You'll destroy everything, he hissed, his composure finally cracking. Your company, your reputation, everything your father built. No, I said, feeling decades of hidden truth crystallize into perfect clarity. I'm going to rebuild it. On a foundation of truth this time. The question is whether you'll be around to see it. The choice I offered him was simple: sign over every claim to Stallworth Construction, dissolve every hidden contract, and walk away with enough to start over somewhere far from Seattle, or watch as 3 generations of carefully accumulated power crumbled under the weight of exposed truth. He chose survival, as men like him always do. Later that night, standing in my office with Caroline, Jennifer, and Marcus, I watched the city lights flicker like stars fallen to earth. The shadow that had haunted our family for so long was finally lifted, but its lessons would remain. I'm sorry, Caroline said softly, her hand finding mine. For all the secrets, all the deceptions. We thought we were protecting you. I turned to face my family, my wife, who had risked everything including my love to fight our battles, my daughter, who had grown stronger than I ever dreamed in the forge of our trials, even Marcus, who had chosen truth over safety when it mattered most. No more secrets, I said, feeling the future unfold before us like a road finally clear of shadows. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The night deepened around our tower of glass and steel, but for the first time in 3 generations, the Stallworth name cast no shadow. We had paid our debts, not in coin or compromise, but in courage and truth. Whatever we built from here would be ours, fully and freely, a legacy worthy of the price we had paid to claim it. In the end, that was worth more than all the towers in Seattle.